They are average. They play in an average league. Celtic wouldn't even be in the top six in our league. So
Hello guys, welcome to Daddy and the Don. Today we're going to be discussing Scottish football and in particular Celtic and how they would fare if they were to integrate into the English Premier League. My friend and co-host Graham the Don Jones, he has upset a few Celtic fans with some of his comments in recent weeks. Going to get it all out in the open today, get things off our chests, clear the air talks and see what our end verdict is. If you disagree or agree with anything the Don has to say, Celtic fans in particular, we'd love to hear from you. Pop it in the comment section. But without further ado, we're going to have a look at how the conversation went down when I caught up with the Don earlier today. Graham the Don Jones, good to see you again, buddy. What have you been up to?
Not really too much, just recording loads of predictions, which has caused a bit of a stir. That's why we're here today, really.
Yeah, what have you done? What damage have you done?
I think I've made a comment that majority of people outside of Glasgow would agree with, but it's upset a few of them fans in that capital.
So what I'm going to do quickly before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I'm just going to run through what's happened and then we'll start off with a bit of a discussion. So you've been given the half of the Champions League predictions this season. So you've had all the Celtic games so far. And I believe it was the Dortmund game after they'd already won 5-1 against Bratislava, wasn't it? Slaven Bratislava. They won 5-1. You predicted Dortmund game. I don't think you predicted them to get humiliated, but you said they're a very average team in a very average league playing against Champions League finalists from the year before. Can only see it going one way. And the average comments seemed to just piss everyone off. No one seemed to come back after the 7-1 thumping they got, but they all took exception to the average bit. So do you think that was a bit unfair, the criticism you got for calling them average? Do you think it was justified that you called them that?
Well, before I answer the question, I want to ask you, and I know that you obviously are asking the questions, but do you believe Celtic are average?
I'd say they can beat some teams in Europe, but they'd probably struggle to get into the top 10 in most of the major European leagues. As in now, like for like, player for player, not 5-year contingency plans, as in if they just played these teams now in the Super League, they'd be found wanting in most of the leagues.
Yeah, agreed. So that's what my point is. Basically, if you look at Celtic's current squad, not a single one of them would get in the top six of the Premier League. Now, we know the top six. I don't need to go through that. The top big six. If you add the remaining four to make the best 10 teams in the Premier League, it's probably going to be Villa, Newcastle, Brighton, and West Ham. In the last few years, they've probably been the best 10 teams. Some would disagree, but for me, they're the best 10 teams. Now, how many Celtic players would get in the top 10 teams? Maybe 4 or 5 would probably play for West Ham and Brighton. Matt O'Reilly plays for Brighton. He's a good player, but a lot of them would struggle to even play in the top 10. So that's my point. You know, these are good players, but Christopher Ajer, Brentford signed him about 4 years ago. Yes, he's had injury problems, but he's not a week in, week out starter, and he was the replacement for Van Dijk. So it sort of sees the levels. I'm not saying it's a problem to play for a bottom 10 Premier League side, because most Premier League sides would get in any division in the world. But Celtic fans think that they're a competition to the top six. That's just not the case. It's not the case, because the quality that they play and the quality they've got is good enough to win their league. You don't see Basel or young boys think that they're great and they would compete with Premier League and Serie A and La Liga and Bundesliga sides. They won't, because young boys is the best side in Switzerland, but realistically, they would probably get relegated if they played in the Premier League. So I think I'm just pointing out facts. I completely have the same opinion of what you just said. It's the quality of the players is not good enough to compete in the top leagues week in, week out. And I'm not saying that they would get relegated, but I'd be very shocked if they would finish in the top 10 for most of the big leagues. They might just scrape it. But are you telling me they're better than Brighton, West Ham? I know we're on bad form, but if West Ham gets some form going, would you tell me that we would beat West Ham 5 times in a row? No. Would Celtic beat every team in the Premier League 5 times in a row? No. Would they beat St Mirren 5 times in a row? Yes. That's the difference, and that's why they're average. They're a good side, but they're not a top side. They're not a side that would go anywhere near the top 6 in the Premier League. And I think I'm just pointing out and stating out facts, really. I don't know if you disagree with some of it, but if you look at their teams, if you look at their striker, Farashi, very similar to Edouard. I was going to bring him up. Farashi scored loads of goals in the last 3 seasons, but would he start for any of the top 10 sides? No, he probably would start Southampton, Ipswich, Leicester. Maybe that's about it. So if you look at their midfield, Adam McGregor is the modern day Scott Brown. Adam McGregor is not one going to be playing for Bristol City. Let's be honest. Am I wrong? Probably not. There's not a lot of real quality. There's enough quality in that division. The winger on the left side, the other Japanese player, Medida, again, a very good player. But would he play week in, week out in the Premier League? I think it would be a reach. I think he would probably be a player that would play for Leeds. So yeah, I'm just putting out facts. If you beat Ross County, Motherwell, St Johnstone, St Mirren for 10 years, then yeah, you're going to think you're a good side. You're going to pick yourself on the pedestal. But reality is, they're just a big fish in a small pond. And one more fact: in the last 39 years, only 2 teams have won the Scottish Premier League, and we know who them 2 teams are. And Celtic have won the 12 of the last 13 years, because Rangers was in it for 3 of them, and Rangers have continued to build. And I'm not saying that's Celtic's fault, but it's like me playing in an under 11s team. I'm going to be the best player most likely, so that might seem harsh, but I think that's a very similar reflection to what Celtic are doing in that division at the moment. Rangers are a decent side, Celtic are an okay side. Both sides would struggle in the Premier League in the sense of being in the top 10. Probably both would be okay and remain in the Premier League, but not a single other team would probably survive. Aberdeen are in good form, but that's just temporary. So that's my opinion, really. I think I hit the nail on the head there.
So I'm going to just go back through the chronological order of all this. So you called them average, you got moaned at, everyone kept quiet after the 7-1 humiliation, I suppose. Then Atalanta, you doubled down on that average comment to say that they'll have good days, they'll have bad days, like what they just experienced. 5-1 win, 7-1 defeat. They drew 0-0. Again, you've got a load of abuse. And then you decided to go the sarcasm option in your Leipzig prediction. So I think it was well done. You got a 0-0 after facing 49,000 shots against you. And you've beaten St Mirren and Raith Rovers 10 years in a row. So I think you got called out for that as well for the sarcasm. Do you think maybe you could have been a bit more of a big boy on that one and just done your prediction, or because they won that game, didn't they, against Leipzig, and then we got more abuse. So is there a part where you've underestimated them slightly in this competition, because they're sort of in a position now where they might qualify, because they've got Club Brugge at home, Zagreb away, Young Boys at home, and then Villa away. Do you think they're going to get enough points to get into the playoffs now?
Look, let's just. I'll get to the video in a minute. Let's just look at who they played in the Champions League: Dortmund, Leipzig, Atalanta, Villa. 4 really good sides, but none of them are a top 6 European side. They've avoided Real Madrid, AC Milan, Inter Milan, Juventus, Bayern Munich, Barcelona, Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool. Not played any of them teams. So when I looked at their fixtures, I said they've got a chance of making 20th, 19th, because they've got 3 or 4 winnable fixtures. Leipzig at home, Atlanta, Dortmund away. I never thought they would have got a win there, but Celtic, Leipzig, Dortmund, Atalanta, Villa. Again, they're all games that they could get something from. They're not impossible games. So I looked at that and I'm going, well, Celtic got lucky here, so they've got a chance of qualifying in the top, between 16 and 20. Because I still expect them not to win any of them games, but I expect them to win the other 3 games, get 9 points, and probably scrape a draw. And 10 points will probably get you 20th, 21st. Does that make sense? So they got very lucky. So they will. I think they will qualify, because Bournemouth beat Man City the other day. Celtic beat Leipzig. I'm not saying that's the same comparison. Teams can beat teams sometimes. Celtic at home against a decent opposition. Leipzig is the 4th best team in Germany. So they should be getting something from that game. I didn't think they would. Most people didn't think they would win that 3-1, apart from Celtic fans or Scottish fans. So they didn't have that hard of a fixture list. When I looked at it, I think Celtic's got a chance here. And them making the top 24 doesn't prove me wrong, because Celtic have been in the Champions League, what, 3 times in the last 10 years, for a reason. If they had Bayern, Arsenal, Juventus, Real Madrid, that's 4 defeats in a row. Home or away, they're not winning any of them games. Simple as. So they got very lucky with the fixture list, though I still expected them to lose 3 or 4 games. I expected them to win 3 games. Bratislava, they're basically the English, they're like Peterborough. Let's be honest. I'm sorry. Let's be honest. That's a fact. They're a League One side. Man City could have played the kids against them and beaten them 3-4-0 if they really wanted to. So let's not get carried away. Club Brugge, they don't want to underestimate them. They're a decent Belgian side. They're probably the Belgian version of Celtic. So, yeah, people say that I've been proven wrong. I've not been proven wrong, because Celtic are going to do absolutely nothing in this competition. Let's make that very clear. If they get through, they'll lose in the last 16 playoff. But when it comes to that video, I'm just going to answer it very simply. It's all for a little bit of entertainment and fun.
Okay. Now, moving on to, you mentioned it. You said, are they as good as West Ham? Are they as good as Brighton, right? So if we just look, if we say recent history, should we go back in the last 20 years, what teams have done from like England and Scotland in European competition, say, just for argument's sake. So I've only got a few I can pick out from Scotland, so we have to limit it.
Yeah.
So obviously they've won the Champions League like back in the 70s and stuff when there weren't many teams in it. But recent history,
60. Yeah, it's not giving them too much credit.
Recent history, they got to the final of the Europa League against Jose Mourinho's Porto the year before Porto won the Champions League, if you recall. I think they lost. It might be an extra time or just a last-minute goal. But that was the second place. And then Rangers have had 2 Europa League finals, I think 2008 and as recent as 2 years ago. Palace's manager won with Frankfurt, didn't he? They beat them on penalties. So when you look at it like that, so Rangers were in that competition. Teams like Brighton and Spurs and teams like that, Newcastle, were in those competitions. West Ham were in that competition, went out in the semi-final. Does that then not put a point that they've managed to get through to that final when some of our teams haven't? That's why they're getting that sense of confidence they could compete?
I think that's a fair point. I think, but I counteract that. It's cup football, I can't remember. There was a championship side who got to the final 4 last year in the FA Cup. Are they the 4th best team in England? So I get that. Villarreal, are they the best? They won the Europa League 3 years ago. Are they the second best team in Europe? Is Atlanta the second best team in Europe? Is West Ham 2 years ago? Are they the 3rd best team in Europe? It's cup football. You play a team over 1 game or 2 games, and on that occasion, Rangers had a decent side 2 years ago. Celtic had a decent, in a sense where Rangers' side was better 2 years ago than it is now, and I think they arrived. I think it was a year that Stevie left during the middle of the season, so they had confidence. They were playing well.
They could have maybe won that if he'd stayed, because he was doing
a
good job.
Yeah, Von Bronckhorst, but they were played against Frankfurt, who are at the point and still probably are 6th or 7th best team in Germany. So club football can throw up any surprises. It doesn't always mean there's going to be the best teams left in it, and that gives Celtic hope for this year. But I'll make it clear they're not going to do anything in the Champions League. But when it comes to Celtic and Rangers as a whole, I would say 20 years ago, both teams could have competed in the Premier League easy. I think when Larson left and when McCoy's retired, that Rangers and Celtic sides in the 90s and early 2000s, they were great sides, and they were sides that could compete. But what's happened is Scottish football hasn't had that injection of money to spend. So it's not there.
The big money in the Prem now has just blown it completely.
Yeah.
Open. It's so hard for anyone to get into that now.
If Celtic and Rangers came in the Premier League and was able to generate the same amount of money and buy players, they have every chance of making the top 6. There's no doubt about it. If they had the same money resources as the top 6 or even Newcastle, Villa, they will have every chance in the world. But if they came in the Premier League now with what they've got and with the players they've got and how they do their business, they're not going to compete in any level in the sense where they're going to win anything. They'll probably stay in the Prem.
That's what I was going to ask you. Do you think both teams would stay up if they joined next season? They'd survived
Yes.
the first season. So
I think Rangers would be in a relegation battle, and I think Celtic would finish 13th or 14th.
because there was a guy in one of the chats that was obviously disagreeing with you, but he was quite reasonable, like a few back and forths with him, and he was agreeing that Rangers and Celtic would stay up, the rest would just be cannon fodder and probably go down to sort of like League One, and in some cases maybe even League Two for like the St Mirrens and stuff. But he was saying he bases it that they'd be able to compete if they had 5 years back to back in the Prem with the money, size of their fan base and stadium like selling out every week. You could probably say that both of them could get 100,000 seat at the stadium and sell that out if they were in the Premier League, because you've got very small, is it like 1 million people in Glasgow maybe, and they're all supporting those two teams?
I completely agree. I said again, I've just said that if they were given the money and the finances, like a Tottenham, like a Newcastle. When I say Tottenham, I know they're part of the Big Six, but let's just move Tottenham away from the top five, because Tottenham never won the Premier League. But if you look at Tottenham, West Ham, Newcastle, Villa, Brighton, they've all been given that injection of cash over the last couple of years, and they've all had success in some period where they finished in a decent position, Champions League, trophies. None of them have really been outside the top 10. I know West Ham have had a couple of dodgy seasons there and then, but I would say they're the top 10 sides, and they're the sides between 6th and 10th. Now, if Celtic and Rangers came in next year, I think they'd both stay up. I think they would. I think it would be a struggle for Rangers, and I think Celtic would be like a Crystal Palace sort of Brentford side. They'd be anywhere between 11th to 15th. I think that's a fair comparison. But if you give them money over time, in 5 years later, if they're still in the Premier League in five years, they've got the finances, and they've got the support, and they've got the money to spend. I think they could compete at a higher level. I think that's a complete fair comment, but I'm basing on it on what I see now and what they have now. And I think if anyone disagrees with me, you've just got tunnel vision on. It's not an offence. They've got a good side. They've got good players. But a lot of these players would end up playing for a top championship side or a bottom 5-6 Premier League side. You tell me, Phil, I'll ask you the question. How many current players in Celtic would play in a top 10 side?
Hardly any of them.
Yeah. West Ham and Brighton might get a couple, but they wouldn't start.
Do you think that Celtic fans now in particular believe they can compete now and haven't got the same logic as this guy saying that they could compete over 5 years? Do you think a lot of them have that tunnel vision to think they could just jump in now and do the business?
Yes, I think they do, and that's the problem. I think you've got to be realistic. I think they'll stay in, but they're not going to be anywhere near the top 6, and that's a fact. The quality's not there. You do man to man with Arsenal. It's 11 Arsenal players. That's it. Simple as.
I wanted to go through, right? So when they play in Europe, they quite often get hided, don't they? Sort of like 5, 6, 7s conceded. I think it'd be a fair statement. Do you think Dortmund will beat anyone 7-1 in the league this year? Even the teams down the bottom. I don't normally see them getting 7 goals. It's normally like 4 or 5, and that's your limit.
No, probably not, no.
But do you ever see Rangers getting hammered? I know it's a different level of European football, but I think they played against Lyon the other day, and they lost 3-1, 3-2. They gave them a game. And I think they just sort of know their capabilities in Europe more. I think Celtic tried to play the same football they play against, like, Falkirk.
St Mirren.
And they tried to play this great football that they mentioned in the comments to you, and they said, "Oh, we've scored 20, let in none, won 6 out of 6." But like you say, they're playing this fantastic football against Chuff. They then tried to play it against Borussia Dortmund, get absolutely destroyed. Where Rangers will go down and say, "Right, first thing, let's not concede any goals. See if we're still in it after half hour, 45 minutes, and then see what we can do." Worst case scenario, they're going to lose 2 or 3-0 and not be absolutely humiliated. Do you think that's where maybe Rangers take a more sensible approach when they're in Europe, and that's why they sometimes go quite deep in the Europa competition?
Agreed. I think that's an absolute spot-on comparison. Celtic believe that they're the side that they are in Scotland in Europe and think that they can compete at the highest level with the way they play. And that's not the fact. You don't see Salzburg from Austria go, "All right, we've just beaten Vienna. We're now going to smash them in Real Madrid." No, you're going to have to put 10 men behind the ball and try and nick a draw and play the counter. And Celtic, against Club Brugge and against Bratislava, they can play their football and to a degree and get success. But though I said Dortmund, Leipzig, Atlanta, Aston Villa might not be the best 4 top elite European sides, they will have to play in the back foot against them if they want any success. Now, yes, they beat Leipzig at home. I didn't watch the game, but I reckon, with hazarding a guess, Leipzig probably controlled more of the ball. If you look against Atlanta, they had 49,000 shots. So it sort of tells you, if you're going to get success, you're going to have to play a certain different way to get that success. And that's what Rangers have had over the last 3 or 4 years. They've had decent results in Europe because they know that when they are away from home against a side that are superior and more experienced in certain competitions, that they've got to play a certain way. They'll play like a let's say a Brentford, well, not Brentford, like a Fulham. If they're away at Man City, they'll play a way where they're not going to open themselves up and they're just going to try and play the counter. But Celtic will go to Man City, as an example, and be like, well, we're Liverpool, we're just going to kick the ball about, and then realise after 4 minutes you're 1-0 down, because you can't do that against the top elite sides. So yeah, I think that's a complete fair comparison. But I go back to Salzburg or Young Boys, all these teams in these, B+ European leagues. They know their limitations and they play that way against the bigger sides, where I think Celtic still think that they're a massive side, and they haven't been a top European side now for at least 20+ years.
So we're going to wrap things up now. We've got most of the agenda off the board. So before we go, any special message for the Celtic fans?
Stay humble.
Okay. You've got the Club Brugge game coming up next. You're going to be nice to them?
Are they humble away?
Home.
I think they'll probably get a win there.
So there we have it, guys. That was the Don's verdict on Celtic and Scottish football. Let us know if you agree or disagree. Pop it in the comments and we'll reply to you as soon as we can. If you did enjoy this video, please remember to like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we will catch you on the next video.